You go.
No radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Monday, October 22nd, 21st. Skipping ahead already. Second show today. And I'm really delighted to have with me today Robert Mayhew. Robert, for those of you who don't know who he is a professor of philosophy at Seton Hall University. He's been teaching there for over 20 years.
30.
Over 30 years. I've got an old bio. Dr. Mayhew's primary research interest is ancient philosophy, but he also has a serious scholarly interest in Ayn Rand and has done a lot of work related to Ayn Rand, from authoring books and editing, collection of essays, and writing and speaking and doing talks, regular talks at Ocon about Ayn Rand. Dr. Mayhew also serves on the board of the Ayn Rand Institute and the Anthem Foundation for Objective Scholarship. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. This is my first time. You had wondered about that on your earlier show, and yeah. Well, we've been on panels a lot and all kinds of other stuff. But
yes. So let's start with your interest in ancient philosophy. Maybe tell us a little bit how you got into ancient philosophy. What was the kind of the path that led you in that direction?
Sure, it actually connects, I think, to interests, things that would interest your audience. I thought philosophy was political philosophy when I was getting interested in ideas, and reading Ayn Rand and or at least starting to. And so I was thinking, when it came time for my PhD, I would work on Hobbes and Locke and the founding fathers and try to show that Locke is very different from Hobbes and things like that. And then I was reading reading Atlas Shrugged for the second time, and I mean, I'd noticed the references to Aristotle before, but hadn't really done anything with the information. Okay, Aristotle, but this time it really caught me. Why is Aristotle the greatest of your philosophers? And why does he have a character reading this obscure, this stuff from Aristotle's Metaphysics in the Valley? And I thought, I want to look into this. Why Aristotle? I'm thinking, I don't think he's a champion of capitalism. And so I went to the very beginning of the complete works of Aristotle, and it was the categories, and I couldn't see the value in it at all. But I became fascinated with that, and while doing that, I got really into not just Aristotle but ancient Greek culture. And I kind of made it a mission to find out what was valuable in Aristotle. I started taking courses in ancient Greek because I knew if I wanted to make this my specialty, I needed to read the text in the original. And so that's how I got into it. And by the time I was really serious about doing graduate work, that was the field I wanted, and I wrote my dissertation on Aristotle's politics, his criticisms of Plato's Republic, and that was that. So I was hooked.
So what made you make that switch? That is, what took you from the irrelevance of categories and metaphysics to, no, I get it. This is amazing.
I wish I remembered it, but it wasn't. It was just something about the breadth and the depth of his thought, and trying to connect it to what Ayn Rand said was valuable about him, because it's very terse remarks, objective reality and the efficacy of the mind, and you don't really see that in those terms. I mean, she saw it in Aristotle, and she knew the history of his influence on Western culture. But I just became very interested in him generally, and then his critique of Plato, his criticisms of the forms, of the communism of the republic and all of that. And then I kind of I had this same interest in political philosophy that really grew out of kind of my interest in reading dystopia novels and anti-communist, Soviets, criticism of the Soviet Union, and
Yeah.
that got me into politics, and so they kind of merged, and I started doing work on Aristotle's politics, and but I wish there wasn't this aha moment. It was kind of just trying to figure out why would Ayn Rand, um, recognize him. And then when I started to read the nonfiction, and she refers to him in for who, for the New Intellectual, and he is the founder of everything. And then she has that one line about everything our language, progress, industry, it all, the founding of America. She laid on his shoulder, or put on his shoulders, and that I found that's kind of bizarre. It can't be right, and yet so I really dug into that, and yeah, that kept me going for a long time, not just through the PhD, but if you remember long ago when you organized conferences, you had that wonderful one in Italy, and
Right.
that's where I gave the lectures on. I gave a pair of lectures, Aristotle and the Renaissance, because what she said, that he
Huh.
made the Renaissance possible, was against everything that you hear in courses in medieval philosophy and in into the modern era, and so I
Did we
wanted to look
record?
into that.
Did
What's
we
that?
record those?
Yeah, I think they exist somewhere. Someone at the time said you should write this into a popular, you should write a
Yeah.
popular book. I said,
Yeah.
nah, no, I'm a scholar, and no one would buy it anyway. And then I think 2 years later, Aristotle's Children came out and made millions. It's,
That's
it's all
right.
about timing. So, um,
So,
but
so I was going to ask, to what extent is it recognized in academia or among scholars that Aristotle plays this role in the West? I mean, we've got Aristotle's Children, we've got The Cave and the Light, we've got
right.
draws. I mean, but to what extent is that view unique to Ayn Rand, or is it becoming more acceptable within kind of philosophy, history of philosophy?
I think it's becoming more acceptable, but I think the way people interpret it is that the story is messier than any one statement can make. So when I was in graduate school, the standard line was Aristotle was the philosopher of the Middle Ages, and Plato was the philosopher of the Renaissance. And what they had in mind was that when Aristotle's works were rediscovered and reintroduced into the Latin West, I mean, they were immediately regarded as important, although they were also censored and put on lists, and the church was keeping an eye on that, on it, because they knew this was it wasn't kosher, to mix religions. Um, but and so it's but it, and by the time you get to Aquinas, for example, I'm actually by I think it was 1254, something like that, to teach philosophy in the universities in the Latin West was to teach Aristotle.
Hmm.
And I mean, so that's why they saw him as this medieval figure. And then in the Renaissance, you get people like Galileo and others sort of pushing back or rejecting this sort of ossified Aristotle, that, Aristotle's view of the universe, his view of the solar system, that was, part of his philosophy. And at the same time, Plato's works, which weren't much known in the Middle Ages, were rediscovered in the Renaissance, and people loved them. You get these, a lot of these figures, even some of the really good ones, who saw themselves as Platonists. Uh, so it gets very confusing. But what people are starting to spend more time, I think, working on is that story doesn't really fit. That Aristotle, yeah, there were these people who were pushing back against Aristotle, but even Galileo, for example, says, while he's objecting to these Catholic Aristotelians who won't look through microscope or through telescopes, he's also saying, I'm the real peripatetic. If you really understand Aristotle, because he wants to look at the world and use your reason to describe
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
And I think you see that, I mean, Aristotle's works were really influential at the University of Padua, and where you had Galileo and William Harvey and people like that. Jim Lennox is doing work, I think, on the Aristotelian influence, the unacknowledged influence of Aristotle on science and things of that sort. So this story that you have, Aristotle arrives in the Latin West, he's influential on Aquinas, he becomes this dogma in effect, which in a way is true. That's what
Mhm.
happens. And then you have these really good people who are, empirically minded in a good sense, if there is one, and well, you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
then, based on sensory observation and reasoning based on that, and a good scientific method. And there's there's definitely an Aristotelian influence there, but it just doesn't. It's not as clean, clear cut as you would see.
So that kind of understanding of the both the complexity of the story, but the underlying value of Aristotle, that is becoming more prevalent among historians and historians of philosophy.
It's not my field, so I haven't kept up. But you do get these popular books about
Mhm.
about Aristotle and his influence, of the books you mentioned, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's more work of that kind. I mentioned Jim Lennox, but he has an Ayn Rand connection, and uh, not that I mean he could have done it independently of that, I think, but there must be work on that. I mean, he's done work on even Aristotle's influence on Darwin, and
Yeah.
there's these interesting connections that haven't been thoroughly explored, I think.
And of course, philosophy, I mean, like Aristotle's impact on, he impacts the culture, and then the culture can impact an individual. It doesn't always go in a direct line. That doesn't mean
Right.
read the person in order to. So before I want to go back to Aristotle and ancient philosophy, but tell us how you discovered Ayn Rand and kind of the influence she had on you in terms of kind of your academic trajectory.
Um, well, I was reading in junior high, so I think I was 13 or 14. I
Oh,
started reading these dystopian novels. And I read Animal Farm, 1984, Brave New World, and then and this is, if you were writing a novel, you wouldn't have your mother influence you. I mean, that just doesn't work. And so, but there it is. I have to tell the truth. And she
yeah.
said, "Oh, have you read Anthem? That's one of those novels." And I said, "No, I hadn't." So I read Anthem, and it was clearly the best. I know you could say that. I mean, 1984 was a longer novel. It was well longer, had a lot more events and stuff like that. But there was something about Anthem that I couldn't put my finger on at the time that was so much better and more inspiring. And I wasn't a really good, very confident reader. So I went looking for her other novels, and I saw Fountainhead. Nah, that's too fat. I don't read these fat novels. Um, but a couple years later, I did read it, of course, and then that led to Atlas Shrugged. And at the time, I had no idea. I mean, neither of my parents went to college. I didn't know what academia was, or I was much more interested in high school in backpacking around Europe and in saving up my money to do that. I didn't have any. I didn't know what I was going to do. So, I went to college not knowing what I was going to major in or anything like that. But I was becoming interested in ideas, and especially politically ideas. And also during this time, I'm starting to read anti-Soviet literature, a lot of it. And that tied in with, when I finally got around to We the Living, that was there. So I'm becoming, I thought of myself as conservative, but that there were things I didn't like about being a conservative, particularly because of Ayn Rand. Like,
Mhm.
I read Wreckage of the Consensus. Okay, there goes the draft. Because I didn't have a good integrated view. I thought, well, if I have to choose, I'm clearly a conservative, not a liberal. But then reading Ayn Rand, the more you read it, the little parts of it get chipped away. No, there goes God. There goes the draft. And it became clear that there was something very different about her. And then I did one of the most important things to do, I think, when you're this point in your development. I went to a libertarian meeting, and it became clear. It was odd because someone had told me the libertarians are the followers of Ayn Rand. And what did I know? I was 20 or
Yeah.
19, something like that.
Yeah.
So I went there and they were so, it was so, I felt, almost an aesthetic negative reaction. And then there was a speaker there. This was the Maryland Libertarian Party or something like that. And he was defending Palestine and the American Indians. And I'm thinking, well, as the kids say today, WTF. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
what the hell is this? And then someone made a critical remark about Ayn Rand because I mentioned the influence. And so in a way, that was it for the libertarians. You know, that was enough. And then yeah, so she was really I mean, clearly was an important influence in kind of getting me in the right direction. Even a very, this is before I read anything about epistemology, and I believe I read Virtue of Selfishness by around 20 or 21, and reading the novel, but just reading it and so much of it just going past. But I was kind of figuring out what I was, and like I said, if they're not really integrated, if you hold a set of beliefs because this must be, I must be a conservative, so I guess they're in favor of the draft, I suppose. But those sort of things that aren't held very well, very tightly, they're easily, jettisoned. And I mean, reading Wreckage of the Consensus, yeah, that is a violation of the individual rights. And then reading, I think, some of the Brandon stuff when I found that the University of Maryland had the Objectivist newsletter and those volumes, I kind of read through those, and yeah, so that really got me in the right direction. And I found that one of the things I was very proud of when I was starting to write papers, it looked like I was majoring in political science and minoring in philosophy. I started to look at what did I like about Ayn Rand's writing. I mean, this sounds presumptuous or whatever, but there was something very clear and logical about it. And I started trying to emulate that in the sense of at least having a good structure and all that. And I was getting good grades and I got good feedback from my professors who liked my writing. And so that made me think, well, maybe I could do what these guys are doing. Because I really,
Yeah.
like I said, I didn't have a clue of what academia was. And so I went to Georgetown originally to study political science or government, I think they called it, with which the idea that I do political theory. And then after 2 years of that, they allowed me to do something which I think would be unheard of now. I jumped ship from the government department to philosophy and started working on ancient philosophy. And the first semester there, it was just serendipity. Alan Gotthelf was visiting professor.
Oh, wow.
And that was wonderful. It was really, that was my first semester, officially as a philosophy student. And I met Alan, and then, I was kind of set.
Yep.
So, by the time I got my my PhD, it was really just a question, can I get a job or not? And that was that. But,
That's
well,
great.
I should mention going back, I mean, the first conference was in '83, and I went to that, and that really, the not OCON, but it was the Thomas Jefferson Institute, I think it was called, and
Yes, there was the predecessor of Ocon. So it was
right. So I
a
went,
somewhat similar format, not exactly, but somewhat similar format.
but they were every other year for 16
2
days.
weeks.
What's that?
But 2 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weekends, I remember. And it
Yeah.
was amazing because you got to meet people, and I met the person I ended up marrying. And I mean, we met in '83, we hit it off in '85, and then why do you need another conference? So we didn't go in '87, we got married in '87, and eventually by the time I returned, with one exception, I think, I was teaching at the conferences, and then I did that with the Lyceum conferences and all those, and
Yep.
so I've been involved ever since. But
Long. Yep.
yeah, but yeah, there was just something about the ancient Greek culture that I really fell in love with, including the tragedies, Sophocles and Homer. I've been returning to work on Homer. Yeah, that's all. It's all been.
So tell us a little bit about your work on kind of I'm curious about Homer. about Homer. What kind of work are you doing on him? And
Well, it's connected. It's not directly on Homer, although it sort of is. Um, I became very interested in the lost works of Aristotle. Uh, we have everything Plato ever wrote. Everything Plato wrote has survived. Aristotle, we have about a fifth
huh.
of what he wrote. But there's a lot of fragments, and fragments can mean either works that survive from antiquity that quote Aristotle, quote a work that doesn't survive, or I mean more literal papyrus fragments, something like that. And one of the works he wrote, and there's kind of a big move now. There's one guy in particular I've been working closely with at the University of Padua. The idea is that we need to reassess all the evidence for Aristotle's lost works. And the first work I have my books here, or some of them anyway. I don't know if you can see that. Is it
Yep. Homeric
Aristotle's
problem.
Lost Homeric Problems? Yeah.
Yeah.
That, and it's Oxford University Press, and I mentioned the Ayn Rand Institute. I
Wow,
always
that's great.
do that. That's why scholars of ancient philosophy look askance. But anyway, so that was the first work of his, lost work that I published on and published a lot on. Namely, he wrote a work called The Homeric Problems, which was said to be in 6 books. That would have been 6 papyrus scrolls. So, it'd be a substantial work. And it was probably, I mean, there was emerging a kind of culture where they weren't sacred texts, but Homer's epics were very important to I mean, if you were an aristocratic young male, being educated, you would be reading and discussing Homer. I mean, and there'd be questions that would arise, and these became known as Homeric problems. And it was probably Aristotle who got this started, but there may have been, and partly it was to discuss, problematic texts or apparent contradictions in characterization, but also there were critics of Homer, like Plato in the Republic says Homer should be banned, and one response to that was to say, well, we'll interpret him allegorically, and Aristotle rejected both of those. He shouldn't be banned, and for reasons deeper than just one's appraisal of Homer, his view of art or literature anyway. But so I became really fascinated in that, and I've published this one book, and then several articles where most of the fragments survive in the margins of the manuscripts of Homer that have survived to the Middle Ages, right? And so they're very, they're difficult to read, and but I rely on other scholars for that. But some of the stuff I've looked at directly, and I just find that really fascinating to dig up this old Aristotle and try to figure out what's going on. And
so I'm curious now. So we're all familiar, I think, with Homer. So what value did Aristotle see in Homer that obviously Plato did not?
Well, Aristotle thought that Homer was the paradigm of epic poetry. I mean, because Aristotle wrote a work in 2 books called the Poetics. The second book is lost, which was certainly on comedy, ancient Greek comedy, the plays like Aristophanes and stuff, and also similar kinds of like there was a genre called lampoons, and he probably talked about that as well. But the first book of the Poetics, which is the one that survives, is on tragedy and epic, and especially tragedy, but which I think Aristotle I think he regarded as a superior form to Homer, but he did think Homer was a genius and brilliant. And the main difference, though, because he thought he created he went under the assumption that there was one man named Homer who wrote both of these plays. I mean, so modern Homeric scholars have very different views of those things. But there's a reason why he keeps getting translated. He's continually discussed. I find there's something really fascinating about these Homeric stories, and they really they contain something of value for understanding not just the kind of the archaic period that it emerged out of, or the Bronze Age culture that it talks about, but the classical period, because they regarded it as such a value. Plato's problem was that Plato thought literature and art generally, representational art, was anti-philosophical. He thought that, the forms, I don't know how much into Plato's metaphysics you want to get, but he was a metaphysical dualist.
Yeah.
Plato thought that this world, the world of our bodies and physical reality, was a quasi-real realm, a reflection of a greater, realm, the world of the forms, or the ideas. Call them forms, I think is better. And this world is a kind of imperfect reflection of the world of forms. Art, he thought, representational art, was a copy of a copy. It was an imitation of this reality, this material world. And so he thought it was the opposite of philosophy. Philosophy is supposed to, for Plato, it involves turning your back on the evidence of the senses, trying to think more abstractly using pure reason alone. That's why he thought mathematics was so important, because mathematics, it seems, it might seem that that's what you're doing, turning your back on the senses, using pure reason, and then in kind of you suddenly will grasp the forms. Or I'm being a little, it's more complicated than that, but that's kind of a story. But the idea is that art does not contribute to that at all. Art is it's a copy of a copy. It's a painter uses his sense perception to look at an artwork and he copies it. And it's often driven by emotion. And Plato seems to think that when their genius did happen, it was because the gods were speaking through, it was kind of divine inspiration. It couldn't have been reason that was responsible for it. And that explains why, since it's twice removed from reality, twice removed from the truth, it's dangerous. I mean, after all, you have Homer has these gods that do horrible things. Let's face it, they're not Christian gods. And
I don't know. Christian God does pretty horrible things.
Well, yeah. Well, he does different horrible things.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
He becomes a man and gives us a philosophy that destroys us. Whereas, Poseidon, pretends to be a human being, and the next thing you know, he's abusing women or something like that. Yeah. And also, I mean, what really, for example, Plato was in the Republic. He particularly found dangerous that brilliant line of Achilles. When Achilles is in Hades, he's in the afterlife. He's kind of got the run of the place, and Odysseus. Odysseus, this is in book 11 of the Odyssey. Odysseus sees him and says, you don't have much to complain about. I mean, yeah, you're dead and you're here, but at least, you're a pretty big man on campus around Hades. And and Achilles says did I mix that up? Yeah, Achilles says to Odysseus, I don't want to hear that, Odysseus. I would rather be the slave of a poor man on earth than king of all of the afterlife. Because for the Greeks, the afterlife, it's just your memories. They go to some place and you have, but for the ancient Greeks, the earth is where it happens. You want to be our hero? It has to happen here on earth. And that's where all you have is, it's like being a grandmother saying, ask me about my grandchildren. That's kind of what Hades is. And for someone like Achilles, no, I don't want any of that. He dies young. He knew he was going to die young. He chose to go to Troy, having been told that he could stay in Ithaca with no fame, but live to an old age. He didn't want that. So, but that's a very brilliant expression of the Greek worldview. And Plato says, no, we don't want that in the Republic. That's going to teach soldiers that they shouldn't fear, they don't want the afterlife. We want warriors going into battle thinking there's something better when they die. And, so Aristotle's rejection of Homer, I think, is not just on literary ground. I mean, Aristotle's rejection, of Plato on Homer, it's not just on literary grounds that Plato didn't understand. Plato was pretty much, he had an idea of art as didactic. It's a morality play or something like that. That's a little unsophisticated, but that's sort of pretty much his view. And if you're going to have art at all, it's got to encourage proper morals. And for Aristotle, I think he looked at Homer in a very different way. I mean, I don't know, it's a story. It has a plot in his view. It has characterization. You can talk about this. That's kind of what these Homeric problems probably were, raising questions. Odysseus would, I mean, one of the ones I have a paper coming out in, well, God knows when these things come out because I send them in on the deadline and then, who knows what academics do. But it's Calypso offered Odysseus, on Calypso's island, offered Odysseus immortality, and he said no. And so that became one of these problems. Why did Odysseus refuse immortality? Because Calypso, and it's not boring Christian heaven, Calypso says, stay with me, you will be immortal, you will have pleasure in my bed every night, you will not grow old. And he says no. And, I'll take Penelope for all her aging. And so the question is why? And, some people think, yeah, why? And I think it relates to that point about Achilles. It sounds really nice at first, right? Calypso is a nymph. She doesn't grow old. She's kind of it's supposed to be really good looking, of course. And she says that I'm not growing old like Penelope, right? But again, for Odysseus, to be a man means to achieve things. And now this was probably, part of the Greek culture that we might pause over, and to achieve things that other people see as great accomplishments. That was really important. And if staying on an island with this really hot goddess for the rest of my life means that I'm going to disappear, I'll be this obscure figure that no one's ever heard of again. Nah, I'm not going to do it. And there were other reasons as well. And people talk about, there was one view was that, well, Odysseus was really smart and he knew that Calypso couldn't grant him immortality. Only Zeus can do that. So that's not as interesting an answer. And Aristotle's answers aren't really brilliant. They're not as interesting as some of the other ones that might occur to us, but
So of these lost works, I mean, you've got the one book on Homer. What else are you guys expecting to find?
Well, a lot of it is not. Well, the work I'm devoting most of my time to now is one called the Zoica, which means animal matters. And one of the last conversations I had with Alan Gotthelf was, someone needs to do more work on that. And I thought, yeah, someone ought to. I wonder who it's going to be. I wasn't. This was I think the last year of Alan's life, and he's been gone 10 years, something like that. I think 2013. So but I then started to work on that. I thought I kind of stumbled across it somewhere, and I started looking at the evidence and wasn't satisfied with what had been written on it in the past. So I started working on it, and I have a couple publications. One publication has appeared already. I have a couple in progress, but most of all, I'm working. What I want to do is, as part of this big project centered in Padua, in the University of Padua, I want to have an edition of the Greek and some Latin texts, translation and commentary, and that's what I'm working on now. And I'm hoping that'll in another year or so that'll be finished. Now, I will say this. I think it's a more boring work because what I argue is that this was, and one of the things Alan talks about in his works on Aristotle's biology is that there was a collection of data stage, an organization of data, and then the explanation of the data, the causal explanation. And we have his works on the collection of data that hasn't survived. Well, that's what I argue that the Zoica is, the animal matters is. And I'm one of the things I spent a week in Padua, which is really lovely because it's 30-minute train ride to Venice, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful city in its own right. What I did is I worked with some of the people there, and I looked at I gave a 2-hour presentation of the evidence for Aristotle's Zoica in Byzantine etymological works. And so I'm scraping the barrel right now. I mean, there's not a lot of stuff left. I've collected the material that exists, but I'm finding it a fascinating activity. Although, if I had to choose, which work would you like to be discovered in the sands of Egypt or in papyrus or in Herculaneum? I definitely want the work on Homer. I think it'd be a much more fascinating work. So,
do we know why Plato's survived and Aristotle didn't?
I think the main reason is Aristotle. I think he appeared at the wrong time in a way. And it's a complicated story, but when Aristotle died, there's stories about his library going to Theophrastus and Theophrastus giving it to his heirs, and they were neglecting the work. And this is why the archives is really important, and neglecting the work. And then it was lost until fragments of it appeared in Rome centuries later. And those are the stories we get from Plutarch and Athena, these ancient authors. And there's disputes about how much we could rely on. I think his Lyceum, which continued after he died, of course, I think it must have had a copy of most of his works. I find that strange that it wouldn't, but it just happened that the rival school, Plato's Academy, which continued, Plato's Academy was in continuous operation from when he founded it until 529 AD, when Justinian banned the teaching of any pagan philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Aristotle's school didn't do so well. That is, his Lyceum continued to work, and that's one of the things I'm interested in now. Is I've become more involved in Project Theophrastus. That's recovering as much evidence as we can about the followers of Aristotle in the early Lyceum. But I think his philosophy just wasn't as popular. It didn't catch on as much during the Hellenistic period after, when things changed pretty radically from the classical period to the Hellenistic after the death of Alexander the Great, and even before that, with the kind of the Macedonian conquest of the whole the whole world, in effect, ultimately. And so what you get is Plato's philosophy, I think, was more popular, and then the new philosophies that emerged: Stoicism, Epicureanism, a bit later skepticism of various forms. These I think they were more influential,
Mm-hmm.
and I think. And then I think a lot of the works just may have been not as interesting because Aristotle was, he wrote works that were probably collections of data about animals and collections of data about one of the works I'm interested in is Aristotle wrote a work on weather signs, and that is predicting the weather based on what the birds are doing and what animal, if the centipedes are running towards the wall, maybe there's going to rain. And I think he didn't believe all this stuff, but he thought that if a lot of people believed it, we should collect this data and see if there's anything to it. So I imagine some of those works were rather uninteresting to philosophers. In fact, it's not philosophy at all as we know it. And since it's very expensive to copy works, and I think they weren't interesting to a lot of people, and so it's that's what I think happened. On the other hand, it's not just boring stuff. I mean, he wrote dialogues on justice, he wrote a treatise on the River Nile, and an explanation of it. He has all these interesting works that he wrote works on medicine. I published an article on possible fragments from that work as well. But so I think it was a lack of interest in some of his works, that his school was not as influential as the other ones. Plus, Plato wrote a set number of, fairly, however many, 34 or whatever it is, dialogues. And no, it's more, it's got to be more than that. But they kind of were carried on by his school, and they never really went out of favor. And by the time you get to the period, I mean, the crucial period is when they start copying papyrus onto vellum or different, kind of into manuscript books. That it's a very expensive process, and the ones that people weren't interested in got lost.
Yep.
Yeah.
So is the work you've done on ancient philosophy all Aristotle, or is it included other Greek thinkers?
Oh yeah, no, I've done a lot of others. I didn't bring them all down here, but well, I brought some of them. I got here. I wrote. This is a translation of Plato's Laws, Book 10. It's a translation with a commentary in the
So do you
Clarendon.
enjoy translating?
What's that?
You enjoy translating?
I enjoy having translated. So that is when I've got the finished product. I do like it, and I do like it particularly when I think there's not a very good translation out there. Yeah, so I like it, and I like right now I have two contracts with Harvard University Press for translations, one of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and one of where I'm general editor of a collection of. It's called the Opuscula. That means Latin for little works in a way. And they're not, none of them are by Aristotle, likely, even though they come down to what's in his name, but they're probably by students of Aristotle. And they're kind of interesting works. And I'm doing a couple of them. And then I found other people who are experts in mathematics or music theory or whatever to do the other ones. And that one was supposed to be ready a year ago, but one person is holding us up. Not me. But yeah, I enjoy the translation works. I also did this is Prodicus the Sophist. It's a collection of the fragments of Prodicus. I dedicated that to Leonard Peikoff, not knowing that right when the book came out, I was asked if I would, and I actually have this one here too. I'm bragging. I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that.
That's okay.
This
That's
is
good.
Theophrastus of on Winds. It's the Greek text with translation and commentary. Had I known that I was going to be doing that, I would have dedicated that one to Leonard, because I referred to him in one of my talks in Athens as Ayn Rand's Theophrastus, and he called me and said he loved that description.
Yeah.
And so I was glad, because I kind of looked at it. Now, in a way, I think he's much more than Ayn Rand's Theophrastus. Theophrastus was the person who followed Aristotle in the school. He kind of did work because Aristotle was a scientist as well as a philosopher. He did work in botany that Aristotle only got a start on, and he did work on winds, and he wrote a treatise on fire and stuff. So he's not, whereas Leonard wrote Opar as a favor to Ayn Rand, in effect. And he kind of, and I think he's in a different position. Theophrastus is among a group of people working in various sciences, where Aristotle was aware that this is my theory, given the best of the knowledge, and so if someone comes along and disagrees with them, that's no big thing. Whereas Ayn Rand, it wasn't a science. She wasn't a physicist and an expert in botany and things like that, where it all just kind of come together. She was a philosopher, pure and simple, and that is very different than a science. And my point is that one of Dr. Peikoff's roles, I think, was to ensure the purity of the philosophy beyond her death to the extent that he could. And that's and unfortunately, he was challenged to do that very early on by people who want to open objectivism up to anything. And I, to do that without in a dogmatizing sort of way is really difficult. And I think what he did in the 80s was just, and the early 90s was really important from that perspective.
Absolutely.
What I see happening in the 80s in a way was when understanding objectivism came out, that was dealing with the rationalism in the movement, and then with fact and value and things of that, it was dealing with the subjectivism in the movement, and so from that, Theophrastus was Aristotle's intellectual heir, and he did what he did, but it wasn't the same, and it wasn't as monumental, I would say, an achievement as well. I mean, they both have hard acts to follow, Theophrastus and Dr. Peikoff.
Because of Leonard, we will get to keep. We've got the full collection of Ayn Rand. We'll keep the full collection of Ayn Rand.
Yeah, indeed.
Disappear, and he made sure of that. So and they've all been published, and Theocrat didn't do as good of a job as preserving Aristotle stuff.
Yeah, I think so. And even Leonard, in some of his more cynical moments, where even having the acid-free paper so it survives the apocalypse.
Oh yeah, no, put it into a nuclear-proof bunker somewhere, bury it all in
indeed,
in Utah. Yeah. I remember that we were supposed to buy a mine in Utah and bury all our works there.
Yeah, so, that sounds familiar.
No, that was anyway. Around 2000, even before 9/11. Yeah. So, so you've done a lot of the ancient philosophy. You've also written a lot about Ayn Rand, and so tell us a little bit about the work you've done on Ayn Rand. I'm just wondering where you get the time to do both. I mean, you do all this, and how you kind of mentally divide the two, or do you see it as more integrated as maybe it appears?
No, not. I mean, I've enjoyed myself. Now, at this moment, I've taken on too much, so I'm not really enjoying it as much as I have in the past. But in the past, I really loved it when I had an ancient philosophy project or two and an Ayn Rand project. And so in the past, that was working for Dr. Peikoff to edit the nonfiction work, the marginalia, the nonfiction work, the nonfiction writing course, and the Q&A, and I think that's it. As far as that goes, I think, and then I did Song of Russia, which I read the Ayn Rand and Song of Russia, which I really enjoyed, which kind of archival.
Explain what that is. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with that.
Yeah, I don't have a copy of it here. That's it's when I went back to my roots in a way, in the sense of when I was really interested in anti-Soviet literature, and there it is. I think Ayn Rand is the first Soviet dissident, the first person. I mean, there were some others who were more wishy-washy, but what she took on was this whole idea of in Hollywood, the communists were mistreated, and isn't it horrible? Well, she was asked to. She worked in Hollywood. She knew what was going on with the Hollywood communists, how they were influencing film in very subtle ways. You could even say very clever ways. And she was asked to at the HUAC hearings, the hearings for the House Un-American Activities Committee. They held hearings to investigate communism in Hollywood, and she was called as a witness. Now, she didn't really think that this was the proper function of Congress. I mean, she thought if they're worried that there's actual foreign governments influence, then that's a proper but that should be the FBI or someone like that having these congressional hearings. But she thought that there was no one really speaking on behalf, getting really what was going on, and she wanted to talk about that. And unfortunately, all they asked her about was the film Song of Russia, and so that's what we have the information where she talks about what an obvious whitewashing of Stalinist Russia it is, and so it's very interesting, I thought, to both get into the making of that film, what that said about Hollywood. It was an interesting time because I could interview one of the screenwriters of the who later turned he turned evidence against the Hollywood communists, so he was treated like dirt for the rest. And the whole idea of that the Hollywood 10, that these people were horrible victims of American oppression when they were defending Stalin. And I mean, were some of them, into the 80s, were defending the Soviet Union and were not apologetic at all. In fact, they demanded that they be treated as heroes. And Ayn Rand, I think she had both her testimony and the things she wrote about it, and I try to gather all that information together and to tell the story of it. And I enjoyed that project very much. But I also came to the conclusion at the end, I never want to read another Soviet dissident, any more stories about how horrible it was in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Although people ought to keep that alive, of course. And
yeah. So in addition, you've done the collections of essays on Ayn Rand's novels.
Yeah, that was the thing to keep me going, to have these Ayn Rand projects. And I was very pleased about that because I kind of, with my own initiative, sort of started writing to academic presses, and the top tier ones weren't really interested. But I got Lexington Books, which was, at least at the time, was owned by Rowman and Littlefield. They were very interested. And we'd also reached a point where I thought, even if the really top objectivist intellectuals didn't agree to write essays for me, we had all these other people who were coming up, and yeah, I think they're terrific. I think they're really important essays. I also was very interested in doing all four and doing them in order, even though that might not seem like a good idea. And I like the historical parts of it. That is the information we have on the history of the works and how they were written and when, particularly with the earlier ones, We the Living and Anthem, when Ayn Rand was really struggling to get things published, and whereas by the time you get to the Atlas Shrugged, there's not much history there except for the drafts, which are fascinating themselves, the drafts of these works, because by then she could pick her own publisher after the Fountainhead.
Yep.
But yeah, so I'm very proud of those, and I wanted kind of historical stuff, literary analysis, and also philosophy, and so there's really good, really excellent pieces in there by Ankar Gate, Tara Smith, Greg Selmary, Tora Buckman has some really good literary analysis in there, and yeah, and I was really pleased that ARI took the initiative to contact the publisher and see about making an arrangement to release them for free on, I think it's New Ideal, right? It's or yeah, I forget.
So they're going to be released as essays, as independent essays?
Yeah, they've kind of released them slowly over going back the past year or so, and so you can find those online, and I think they're real gems, because when they came out, people were aware of them and were reading them and thought, yeah, this is great stuff. But the next generation comes along, and you want to keep those because there's not a lot like that out there, because a lot of the stuff that's being written by Ayn Rand is really bad.
About Ayn Rand, you mean?
About Ayn Rand? About Ayn Rand is really bad. And from people who don't know what they're talking about, this includes some of the biographies that are out there, but there's also, I think there's one Ayn Rand as a Jewish person.
I heard about that. I don't read these books, but I hear about them. But
yeah, and then I mean,
philosopher.
I wrote a review. I didn't want to do it, but I figured if I didn't say yes, someone else would, and not as good. I was asked to review a book it was on Ayn Rand and Chernyshevsky. He's this Russian, 19th century Russian egoist, socialist, nihilist, anarchist, the whole bag, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard this before, the idea that he was an influence on Ayn Rand. And the book was so bad. It was so shocking. But I think people don't have the same standards if it's Ayn Rand, because, okay, any stuff that some historian can come up with, They would never in a million years, I think, if someone in ancient philosophy tried to have such a shoddy job
Yeah.
of making connections between two thinkers. At least I haven't seen works like that. But yeah, I think for the time being, these are essay collections are really valuable, and there's some real
Great.
gems in there. And I'm glad you can find them. The New Ideal has been publishing them fairly regularly, and I
Good.
think they've gone through them. I don't know if they've done all of them, but a great many of them.
Well, it's great because now they're searchable. So any of you who are interested in any of these essays or essays about any of the novels, you can find them online. They're easy to access.
Yeah, here's
Uh, any projects you're working on right now in terms of, oh,
yeah. There's I guess the Ayn Rand,
the
the
Atlas
Atlas
Shrugged
Shrugged
one.
one. So
Yep.
that's what it looks like there. So
Yep. Yeah, I've got them all here behind me.
yeah.
Um, is are you working on any Ayn Rand project right now?
No, and I want to find an Ayn Rand project. I've done a lot of talks recently on Ayn Rand and atheism and her
Mhm.
unique approach to atheism. I mean, the form it takes, the arguments against the existence of God, things of that sort. I kind of missed the bus on that one because the time to write a book on that would have been when the new atheists were out
Yeah.
there, and I was just doing other things, and I was working on it, and I talked to Ankar about working on the stuff, but it's finding the time. So that's it's in the back of my mind. It might be
It
better for
would
me
be
in
still
retirement.
relevant. I mean, a lot of these atheists are finding God, so maybe now's a good time.
Yeah,
Maybe now's a good time to remind them of better arguments.
yeah, or if they're not finding God, they're cultural Christians or
Yep.
something like that. And
Yep.
that's a good point. Yeah, these
I
things
think it's,
aren't.
I think it's a great time because they're all questioning. They all have these doubts, and now is a good time to bolster the case.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been working on. I've given a number of talks, even on the ontological argument, as esoteric as that is. I'd also like to find another archive project. I'd like to go look at the drafts of the We the Living and Anthem, and see if I can come up with a project there. I like the idea of digging through the archives, and um, I think it'll become easier to access the material and all
Mhm.
that. And so something like that, it's in the back of my mind. It's just I've got so much ancient philosophy stuff
Sounds
I've
like,
I've
yeah.
said yes to. So it'll be a while. But yeah, I definitely uh, I want to write more on Ayn Rand, that's for sure. But I should mention one piece that I wrote a long time ago, but will be appearing. There's the Ayn Rand Society Philosophical Studies
Mhm.
is a series published by University of Pittsburgh Press, really beautifully published. They recently published Tara Smith's book, Egoism Without Permission, which really I recommend that book. But the series, the collection of essay series that I referred to, they have. I think the next one that will be out is on Aristotle and Ayn Rand, or Ayn Rand and Aristotle. I forget what title they arrived at. By Jim Lennox, edited by Jim Lennox and Greg Selmeri. And I have a piece in there on Ayn Rand and Ayn Rand as Aristotelian literary aesthetics. So it's comparing Aristotle and Ayn Rand on literary
Oh,
aesthetics.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you've probably heard a version of it in the 2000s at some point, but
Yes. Yes.
finally it's ready to
Good.
go.
Good.
So yeah, things are happening, and I think you go to a conference and you're introduced to a young objectivist intellectual you've never heard of, and that's a really good sign for someone who's been around for a while. I imagine like you, um, that's always a good sign that whoa, there are more and more of them, and
Fresh blood, new
what's
people.
that? Yeah,
Great. Fresh blood. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's very encouraging, and we have, I mean, I've liked the fact that, well, Alan Gotthelf is gone now, but he was, a big scholar in ancient philosophy. It's terrific having, Greg, who's often been really good with feedback on the translation projects, of
Mhm.
mine. And in fact, we just had a workshop on Eudemian Ethics Book 8 in Austin that Greg kind of hosted, and we kind of organized that together, where mostly just reading Greek and looking at my translation with Greg and Jason Rines. And
Oh, wow.
um,
Good.
for a certain kind of person, that is a blast. That's and I'm one of them. So it was terrific. So it's nice that I have this overlap, that there's always been a few people interested in Greek philosophy in the objectivist universe, and
Yep.
I hope that there's some younger ones on the horizon. I hope. I don't know who they
Yeah,
are.
I hope so too. Hope so too. All right, so we've got a bunch of questions.
Oh, terrific.
This is good. So actually, this I think is so. This is from Adam. Let me just wait. I've got a few thank yous I need to do. Let's see. Carolina, thank you, Jonathan. And these are the stickers. Shelly, Mary Aline, Mary Aline again. All right, cool.
Oh, I
Uh,
didn't. I didn't. I was worried I was going to bankrupt you tonight or something. That.
no, we're doing great. We're doing great.
Okay,
So
good.
Adam has a $50 question, and he says, "I don't know a lot about philosophy, but it is very interesting. Where do you think Rand most diverges from Aristotle? From what I think I know, he spoke of averages when it comes to behavior, inherent purposes, and a larger role of government."
Well, that's a lot of different issues. I mean, I think um, she always spoke in very general terms, that his metaphysics was, recognizing that existence exists, things are what they are, which is the flip side of, A is the, he talked in very serious terms about the law of non-contradiction. And so, the basics of his metaphysics as she described them, but, jettisoning all the I think she calls it the nonsense about the moving spheres, and the prime mover and all that stuff, which is really, in a way, it's kind of astronomy or something like that. Not exactly, but because he refers to gods and things like that. So she doesn't accept that. I mean, she would accept the importance of logic. Now, he mentioned some things in ethics. There are going to be real differences. I don't know about the average. I mean, she doesn't have a theory of the mean, virtue as a mean between extreme, so the details will be quite different in her ethics and in Aristotle. Uh, um, you could say in very broad brush terms that, they're both virtue ethicists. I think I would call them, I know in the case of Aristotle, this is sort of a controversial issue. I think they're both egoists, in the sense that the purpose of a person's life is to achieve one's own, happiness in those terms, but that how he formulates it and all of that, there's going to be a lot of divergences. But the person to ask there is Greg Solmeri. He's done some really excellent stuff on the differences between Aristotle and Ayn Rand on ethics. He gave a talk at Aristotle's Lyceum on an aspect of this topic. I'm pretty certain, I haven't seen the table of contents recently, but the work I just referred to, the Aristotle and Ayn Rand volume, Greg will have something on that. And there must be lectures of his available that where he talks about these issues. So, and then in politics, by the time you get to politics, you're so far removed from the basis that, yeah, to say he has a larger role of government, yeah, that's true. But it's such a strange context, the ancient Greek world. You could focus on the positives. He rejected Plato. He rejected explicitly, and that was my doctoral dissertation in my first book, was Aristotle's criticism of Plato's Republic. And there are these kind of themes running through his criticism, and it's not just he's not criticizing the forms and all that in this in the part of the politics I'm talking about. He's criticizing the communism of the Republic. Aristotle he says Plato is focusing too much on, he's trying to create the unity of an individual human being out of a city, and that destroys actual individuals. And so he has a lot of good things to say about why we don't need philosopher kings. In fact, why we need, there is the rule of law rather than a rule of kings. He has a kind of a side where he sort of defends kingship in certain contexts, but I think that's a nod to his Macedonian patrons, maybe. I don't know. And I remember when I was working on the Marginalia, Ayn Rand gets to a point, I think in John Herman Randall's work, Aristotle, which she praised, she gets to a point where he discusses slavery, and she writes in the margin something like, "Oh, Aristotle,"
Yeah.
say it ain't so. But what do you expect? What can you expect from? You can't have, I think, a really an actual advocate of individual rights when there is no conception of rights yet, and you can have. He talks about freedom and he says positive things about freedom, but his conceptualization of what freedom is very dubious in certain aspects. So by the time you get to politics, they're no longer worth comparing. However, they are worth comparing when you get to their aesthetics, and that's what I do in the article I mentioned earlier.
And where do you put them in epistemology? What is the theory of knowledge? How do they compare there?
Again, just in broad brush strokes, he believes in the efficacy of reason based on sense perception. He believes that nothing, as Thomas Aquinas, but nothing reaches the intellect that doesn't come through sense perception. So he's very good in those very general terms. He regarded logic as really important, and things of that sort. But again, I found it a superb course, but I don't know how easy it is. But Greg Salmeri gave a course years ago on Aristotle's theory of knowledge, something like that, where he goes into detail about all the different kinds of intellectual virtues and what's going on, and it can get very complicated. And I guess the real point of comparison in epistemology would be their theory of concepts. And Ayn Rand describes Aristotle as I forget the expression she uses now, a moderate realist. That's it. And there's, I think, real questions as to whether whether Aristotle was actually even better than that. I mean, he was certainly better than Plato. He was better than the sophists. But how close he is to object, I mean, you can find passages that sound like measurement omission, but
Wow.
What you can make of that, I mean, we don't want to massage Aristotle into to Ayn Rand, but I think she would say the important thing is he's pro-reason, he's this worldly, he recognizes, things are what they are. I mean, the primary objects of reality, according to Aristotle, are the entities around us, and he recognized entities, and he made the distinction between entities and attributes and entities and actions, and all of that is crucially important. And she recognized that. So.
Good. All right, Baker. He says, enjoyed your reason in ancient Greek drama lectures. Do you have any more work on ancient plays or poetry? Also, are there other objectivists working on these topics? And if so, what kind of things are they working on?
I don't know of anyone working on ancient Greek literature like that. That was one of my funnest. I enjoyed myself with that course very much. It was also, if I could brag, it was the one lecture, the one class where Leonard Peikoff sat in when I did. I applied his theory of how to analyze plays. I applied that to Aeschylus's Agamemnon. And he was thrilled, and I was thrilled that he was thrilled, and I really enjoyed that course generally. So thank you for, you never know what happens to these courses that we gave decades ago now. I think that's right. I think it's decades, plural. that whether they just kind of float into the ether or whether people are still listening to them. I've not done in my own teaching. I've kind of worked on some of these plays that aren't in that course. That the youth Euripides, Medea, and Sophocles. I think Oedipus the King. No, I did Oedipus the King in that course, and Leonard did Antigone. But anyway, I've done some other things, but I haven't given lectures on it or anything of that sort. I did translate a play of Aristophanes called The Assembly of Women, which is Aristophanes' critique of egalitarianism and communism. It's a fascinating play.
Richard asks, were Plato's forms a rejection of concepts, an inability to understand them, or something else?
I think you could say it was both of those first two. Now, it's difficult because you could say in some respects his heart was in the right place, and that is, he thought it was really important that the concepts we work with, this is our language, universals, that they be objective, would be our language. That is, or to put it that way, that they refer to something that is absolutely true, that absolutely exists. So he was resisting the sophists who claim that justice is just, it's obeying the law, and if you can get, if no one's watching, you can get away with it. It has no harm to you. There is no justice. It's a human construct, as the postmoderns might say. He was rejecting that, and for good reasons. He thought it was very important that we think there must be something that justice refers to, that is what it is, right? And the same with the other virtues and other concepts, like the human being, for example. It can't just be a bunch of stuff that people make up. He thought that was very dangerous, and we would collapse into, we might say, nihilism or something like that. So he was aware of that. He also thought it was very important to answer people like Heraclitus, who thought that, you look at the world, there are no real entities. It's just all this flux. And I think Plato thought the only way to combat that and to improve it is to say, yeah, that might be true of this world. Things come into existence, go out of existence. We're constantly changing, but it's not true of the forms. So he didn't know how to come up with an objective view of concepts, of universals, and so it's easy to criticize him for doing it the way he did, and he deserves some of that criticism, I think. But I also I'd want to cut him a little slack, because I think his motives were to some extent pure, you might say, or good. Let's say that'd be a better way of putting it. However, if you try to achieve in trying to defend that view, you start to denigrate sense perception, denigrate this world, then there's got to be something wrong with you. There's something not healthy, not good, and it likely connected to a sort of contempt for the world around him, and a kind of a lofty conception of what philosophers were that was not at all admirable.
Yep. Paul asks, Dr. Peikoff says, quote, the arbitrary has no epistemic status. Is that a statistically likely assertion that is without evidence an arbitrary assertion? Oh, no, is a statistically likely assertion that is without evidence an arbitrary assertion? I don't get that. How can the statistic be without evidence?
Yeah, that's, I think you would say, I mean, it's, whatever meteorologist assured that there's an 80% chance of a thunderstorm tomorrow, I don't quite get it. Or there's a 55% chance that Trump will win, which is not to say he's going to get 55% of the vote, right?
Good.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't get claims about likeliness. Now, I could imagine a case where, you're reading, what is that, Piketty, the guy who wrote Capital, who comes
Yeah.
across some statistic,
Yeah.
and it's purely arbitrary. Or the best example, in fact, I have my students read this. Alex Epstein's first book, what is it called? The Morality of Fossil Fuels? Is that
Yeah,
what
I
it?
think so.
Yeah, a moral defense of fossil
Defense.
fuels. There's a chapter in there about that claim that was going around that 97% of all climate scientists believe that global warming is happening. It's caused by human beings and it's dangerous. He debunks that. I mean, he analyzed that, and it's if you see what's behind that, then that would be a statistic that it is arbitrary.
Yep.
And the people who mouth it are just, accepting something passively or are purely dishonest. And either one of those is an unattractive thing to be. But I don't know if that's really addressing your question. And I really don't know statistics, but
he adds to this, Boltzmann brains seem arbitrary, but not alien life. No hard evidence for either, though.
I don't know I don't know what Boltzmann's brains are. For alien life, you have to ask why. Why would you ask the question? So if that is, there has to be a reason for raising it. Is there any chance that are living beings somewhere in the Andromeda galaxy? Now, from last I read, the Andromeda galaxy had 1 trillion stars. Now, but I don't know, how do you assess the question? I would say, in a kind of sort of not philosophical at all way, yeah, I guess. I mean,
he's saying that's arbitrary because you have no evidence.
Yeah, but there's no evidence
right.
Except for the fact that we know that there's one planet where life has emerged.
Yep.
We
Yep.
know that scientists have discovered what is it, exoplanets, the ones that are outside of our solar system. They have identified ones that seem to be Earth-like in the range of temperatures that are, yada yada yada. So you could say that whereas in 1600, if someone speculated about life outside on a planet other than Earth, that was purely arbitrary. It wasn't really based on anything. Whereas now it's quite different.
Yep.
But I don't have, but if someone said there's no evidence of life on, in other galaxies, I don't know what would the point of a statement like that be, except, okay, they haven't landed here yet, or we haven't communicated with them. But so there has to be a good reason.
It's a question of what evidence means in this context.
Yeah.
There's life on Earth. That's evidence.
Yeah, indeed.
And then there's evidence that the planets like this exist, as you said. That constitutes evidence. So it really, evidence doesn't mean the specific concretes that you're looking for, that life on other planets, therefore I need evidence of literal life on other planets. It means the evidence that the context, the whole, is possible.
Right.
I think there's an equivocation of evidence. Adam says, for Robert, who were the philosophers who influenced Archimedes?
Oh, that's a good one, and I don't know the answer to that. I just don't. That's Greek mathematics, and that's one of those Greek mathematics and Greek music I'm pretty bad on. Yeah, so I have to plead ignorance here. I just don't know. Pythagoras.
Merlin says, Dr. Mayhew is incredible. It seems like he's already done the work of 3 lifetimes. I love hearing him talk about his passion and accomplishments. That's nice.
Oh, thank you. Who is that?
Mary Eileen.
Oh, that's I think I know who that is. So yeah, thank you, Mary Eileen.
Adam, follow up to Rand divergence from Aristotle question. Any issues where you diverge from Rand? Have you found any contradictions in her philosophy of objectivism?
No. I mean, it's a system. I would say, there are some areas of her philosophy that I just don't know. Like, for example, I could not give a lecture on measurement omission, but I've read it. I've read Dr. Peikoff's version of it. It all sounds like, yeah, uh, this is the answer. This is the solution to the problem of universals. But I would never say that, well, I don't know it really well, therefore I'm open to the possibility that she's wrong on something. I don't look at it that way.
Yep.
There might be things I disagree with, but none of them are important or fundamental. Um, I don't have strong views on dancing, but I don't think tap dancing is my favorite, but I'm open to persuasion. So it would be on the level of that, or a kind of novel. Maybe there's a novel she liked that didn't do much for me, but
Those
even
aren't
that I have a hard
objectivism.
time.
You wouldn't consider objectivism.
No, 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 that's not objective. Oh yeah, he specifically asked about objectivism. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find one of the reasons it's such an integrated system, that's an area where I think she differs from Aristotle, and why Aristotle's followers could go in different directions from Aristotle, is it's such an integrated system. So I find that even when I encounter people who, I agree with everything she says except her views on modern art or something, if you really dig, you start to see that no, you are getting other things wrong besides her aesthetics, and it's fascinating how that works in a way. But it really is an integrated system, and I've not encountered anything. On the contrary, that I find the more I read, and go back to those essays you haven't read in a
Yeah.
long time, it's like, wow, that is clarifying that connection. And I've done that recently going when I started taking, becoming very interested in her views on the arguments against the existence of God, and her particular view of atheism. You find how brilliant the philosophy is, and how tight knit, and how everything's connected. And if you go wrong on, I have to plug in my. If you go wrong on one little area, you start messing up the kind of a cascade effect. Um,
Yep. So Liam asks, why is Plato so dominant despite being wrong about everything?
well, where is he dominant? I mean, who has he influenced? And he's kind of the philosopher of religion, I think. And I mean, I think it was W.T. Jones who said that the biggest irony in Western philosophy was that Aquinas merged Christianity and Aristotle. That was just bizarre. The early Christians loved Plato.
Yep.
In fact, some of them thought Plato was so good that he had to have stolen it from Moses. That is, from Jesus wasn't around yet, but it was. So you see that in early philosopher Philo of Alexandria, and Justin Martyr, and some of these early Christians. They loved Plato, and they were right to do it. Augustine said that it was the Platonists. He never read Plato in the original, but he said it was the Platonists that allowed him to see that it made sense to believe in spiritual beings, entities that had no physical embodiment. Plato did that. So, he's wrong on those issues, but the people who are influenced by him don't think he's wrong. They think he's brilliant, and that's often how it goes. I mean, Kant is even a worse example. How could he be so influential, given what he's done and what he says, and how wrong he is?
And maybe you'll understand this question because I don't. This is from the analytical synthetic dichotomy. How does objectivism account for the ontological difference between sin and sendes without reducing all complexities to mere sendes? Seiendes.
SEI?
Sendes. Between
I don't understand it.
SEIN and SEINDES.
I don't understand it. I understand the objectivist rejection of the analytic synthetic dichotomy. But that is, and Dr. Peikoff wrote a brilliant essay that was attached to the ITOE.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I don't understand the question either. So
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So
Joseph asked, have you written or done anything on Da Vinci, particularly his Aristotelianism, his integrations across multiple disciplines, and the elements of Platonism that infected some of his thoughts?
no, I've not. I've read on it, but I haven't done it. Um, I went to the Da Vinci Museum in Milan this past summer, where you can see his inventions are people created them. That's kind of interesting. But I've not, and I've actually not read him in years. So I can't answer that.
I recently read his biography. What's his name? Wrote the guy who did Steve Jobs. I forget the author's name. Anyway, Da Vinci's life is pretty amazing. All right, so analytic synthetic dichotomy says what's meant is being and beings. So how does objectivism account for the ontological difference between being and beings without reducing all complexities to mere beings? I still don't understand the question.
I don't understand that either. I mean, the analytic synthetic dichotomy is that there's two kinds of statements. An analytic statement is like uh, um, all bachelors are male, because bachelor by definition is an unmarried man, right? And that's an analytic statement. You can see it's true just by analyzing the words. Whereas a synthetic statement would be water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level, or something like that. That's a synthetic statement according to this view, because you can't analyze it just on the basis of the terms. Now, Ayn Rand rejects that entirely. That all statements are analytic or synthetic, depending on how you look at it. And her view is that if you, I think she calls it the anti-effort in one of the marginalia, the anti-effort mentality, that if you really understood everything there is to know about a concept in a statement, you would see that it's quote unquote analytic. Now, she wouldn't put it that way, but so for example, you say, all bachelors are men, just by, and you compare that to a synthetic statement like iron floats as iron sinks in water. Now, her view is if you know all there is to know about water, and all there is to know about iron, and all there is to know about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that it's all there. It's not somehow not quite as clear or not quite as crisp and neat, as a statement like the analytic ones. Now, what about beings and being and beings? I don't
saying the analytic synthetic dichotomy is that's his handle. That's his name.
Oh.
So the question is not related to his name.
Oh.
The question is related to something in Heidegger's philosophy. I don't know how well you know Heidegger. I don't know Heidegger at all. Sciendes refers to individual entities, while
no, those are German words.
Fundamental concepts of existence.
No, I don't like Heidegger at all. If I quote him it's to make fun of him. I have a paper coming out on Eudemus on infinity, whereas Eudemus was a follower of Aristotle. He was a colleague of Aristotle. He was one of these people who was around when Aristotle died. He went back to Rhodes and started kind of an Aristotelian school there, and he wrote. He defended Aristotle's views on infinity, and at the end of the paper, I quote Heidegger on infinity. I wish I could remember, but he's kind of, if you want to talk about infinity, you can't use science. Science is can't handle the concept of infinity. But that doesn't mean it's bad to talk about infinity, because all that means is science can't handle it. And he goes on to talk about, and I think Ayn Rand quotes it somewhere, and I'm trying to think where she quotes the passage, but it might be in ITOE, where the attempt to analyze infinity, it melts in the crude acid of logic or something. In other words, I discuss these topics, but I don't use this mundane logic and scientific reason that you people down there. Maybe I'm in not interpreting Heidegger correctly, but I've always found him impossible to read, and not because he was way over my head. I mean, I find higher mathematics impossible to read, and that's my problem because I'm ignorant. But reading Heidegger, I think, this is Nietzsche's poets muddy their waters to make them appear deep. Well, it happens to philosophers too, and Heidegger, I think, is one of them. My understanding is he's more difficult than Kant in German. So.
Okay. Wow. So Colt writes, I'm reading Plato right now. Can't wait to move to Aristotle. Do you have any advice on where to start with Aristotle? Any advice about reading him or Plato?
I would say with both of the, Plato's is a little easier because you can start with the shorter, what are called Socratic dialogues, like the Euthyphro and the Laches, and you'll read the famous Apology, which is his defense speech, things of that sort. They can be lovely. And I'm teaching a seminar on the Republic right now. That's the whole of the Platonism is all there. It starts off with ethics, but it ends up being his metaphysics, his epistemology, his ethics, his political philosophy, aesthetics. It's all there. And it's an interesting dialogue, I must say. With Aristotle, my recommendation is to follow your values. What is of interest to you? If you like ethics, start reading his work on ethics. If you like his politics, start reading that. If you're interested in literature, read the Poetics. For the rest, it gets difficult. If you're interested in metaphysics, if you jump right into the metaphysics, that can be pretty difficult. Maybe get a copy and flip through the table of contents, find a topic. His discussion of the law of non-contradiction is fascinating. He talks about God in some places, which is sort of strange, but it can be very difficult to read. And same with his logical works. I've stayed away from them because they're really difficult. I've read them, but I don't. It's not something I write on. So that would be my advice with Aristotle.
Yeah. Oh, here's a question you've been waiting for. Are you voting for Trump or Harris?
I'm abstaining, and I'm hoping Harris wins. I respect objectivists who take a different approach. I take very seriously the idea, and I did this very early on. I really like the principle that Ayn Rand says there are limits to the lesser of two evils, and if you can't find more positive than negative in the evil candidate, the worst candidate, the non-ideal candidate, abstain. And that's what I'm doing. I was hoping the Republican Party would be shocked by Trump and his claim, his behavior, and would come up with someone halfway decent. We're pining for the days of Mitt Romney, right?
How pathetic is that?
Yeah, I would, that's just, I don't know about George Bush, but so yeah, Trump is impossible. I think he's destroyed the Republican Party, and the creatures who are coming up in his place are in some respects more dangerous. They're worse because they're articulate, they're intelligent, they read books, and they're not sociopaths. And but he's made them possible in a way. And I would say in this connection, I think it was it in 2020 that we did that podcast together, you, Ankar, and me. I thought that was really good, and I thought it's worth listening to again, where the three of us talked about the presidential elections, and we focused on we spent a lot of time talking about Ayn Rand and what she says about presidential elections.
Yeah.
And I think we did a really good job, and that's worth surprise, surprise. A lot of those issues are still alive now. But
Same issues. Yeah.
but I would say there are some things in the case of Trump that I regard as unforgivable. I mean, we could make a long list,
Yeah.
but I mean, saying he loved the dictator of Korea,
Yeah.
his admiration for thugs, for Putin, um, it's abysmal. And I made the point in this podcast that he's so bad that even if he does something good, you can't say, well, he's done this, done that. The good things he does are an embarrassment.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned at the time, moving the capital to Jerusalem of Israel and pulling us out of the peace accord, the what is the Paris Accords, the
Yeah.
environmental accords. Those would be great from anyone else. But when you come from him, it's just this more nutty stuff from this guy who's now, is RFK really going to be his health?
He's gonna ban non-organic food. I mean,
Yeah.
we're either gonna eat organic or not eat it at all.
Yeah. So yeah, Trump is not now, there was a day when I thought, you know what, I'm going to bite the bullet and I'm going to vote Democrat. I'm going to vote for Harris. And then I
Yeah.
went online and started reading her position. And I thought, no, if she had come out with a really strong pro-Israel statement that made it clear that she repudiated, that she had nothing to do with that wing of the Democrats, and she didn't do that, as far as I'm concerned. And
She never did.
yeah,
So that episode is on New Idea. You can find it on YouTube. It's called "Thinking About the U.S. Presidential Elections." It was taped in September of 2020, I think 28th or 29th of September, and you can find it online. So it is available.
yeah,
Let's.
in 2 elections ago, I said, I don't support Trump. I think he's really dangerous, but I could kind of understand yada yada. I won't say that now. I I don't understand why any of us would vote for Trump.
Yep. Yep. All right. John asks, in editing Rand's Q&A, did you did you accurately transcribe Rand's answers to questions such as the morality of smoking and using saccharine?
Oh, well, this is an awkward kind of question because I was asked by Dr. Peikoff if I would edit the Ayn Rand's Q&A. I mean, I think I broached the subject with him, and he talked about it had to be edited, or if Penguin wouldn't go for it, and that he was going to oversee the editing. And now there was no there wasn't any, I would edit her, and then he would have suggestions, and I would edit a bit more, and he would, no, you need more editing here. And I was aware at the time that people are not going to, like this, but I assumed people would be good spirited for because almost all of it is available. And, any of the cuts that were made, you could see. And I mean, I think it's possible that I made cuts that I shouldn't have, but I stand by the work. But if it weren't for the fact that the estate of Ayn Rand was behind the project and had control of it, I probably would have done some things differently, but then it wouldn't have been published by Penguin. It would have been a different kind of book. Now, I don't remember that particular one, but there was some issue that Leonard had issues about, but I just don't remember it. So if if you have the original and you're comparing it to the Q&A and the Q&A is different in a way that you don't like, then you should blame me. I mean, I did it. What can I say? I'm not going to throw Leonard under the bus because I could have, if I objected to something, I could have said so. And sometimes I did, and sometimes he said okay, and other times he didn't, and there it is.
Baker says a donation for Robert's future translation of Nicomachean Ethics.
No, there's too many good ones, or at least okay ones out there. So that one I'm not going to do. I'm doing the Eudemian Ethics now, which is the kind of the neglected stepchild.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I didn't realize there were two ethics books.
Yeah, there are two. There's four ethical works, but two of them are by Aristotle. One of them, the Magna Moralia, people disagree, but he probably wasn't by him. And then there's one called Virtues and Vices, which is likely not by him, almost certainly not by him. But yeah.
Andrew says, was there any ancient philosophy that identified the principles of the initiation of force as evil? What was Aristotle's position on force in social dealings?
I can't think of anyone who puts it in those terms. The initiation of force. I don't think so. I mean, they have words like abuse and things of that sort, but what they talk about is there are crimes, there are acts of injustice, and they would include, murder and rape and things of that sort. But it's treated as if these are wrong because they're unjust. That is, an innocent person doesn't deserve to be treated this way. And in creating a civil society, you're going to have laws that if it's a just society, etc. So there won't be a conception of rights there, a conception of the initiation of force. If there is anything that comes close to that, I'm not aware of it.
Andrew also asks, can you put Yaron in his place and explain to him that romanticism applies to not just literature, but all the fine arts?
No, you've asked the wrong person here. Because I believe I've heard that exchange that you're talking about, and if I remember correctly, I agreed with what Yaron said. I think maybe at the end of what Yaron said, you conceded a little bit about maybe you'd call the David romantic or something like that. But I think there's a really good Q&A about that in the Q&A book. Ayn Rand addresses that, and I can still hear her voice. This is from there was a kind of extra Q&A session that went off topic, which was wonderful in the nonfiction writing course. And someone asked her a question about romanticism in painting. Would you call this one? And she said something to the effect of, sometimes, yeah, there's something like that, but basically, someone has to do the work that she did in literature.
Yep.
That is, she reconceptualized what romanticism was. Now, she didn't rip it out of its historical context. Romanticism is something that happened in history, in the history of art. And it's not something that you could, say that, oh, that's what Homer was doing. Now, you might look at, he's heroic and romantic art, but it was something particular. And what she thought was that the people who talked about romanticism, they conceptualized it improperly. They said things like the romanticists, and in really, really bad ways. The classicists were the ones who concerned with reason, and the romantics rejected that in favor of emotion and national identity and things like that. She said, no, that is such identification through non-essentials. What was really going on was with romanticism was an emphasis on values and on the independent choices and values of the artist. And what you see is, it's not, some kind of music from the medieval period where that all kind of sounds alike or whatever, or certain kinds of sonnets or something. Well, I don't want to get into poetry, I guess. But Romanticism, you see that it's the recognition of values, and that means that human beings have volition. They make choices that are based on values, and it's the interaction of those choices that create a plot. That's why the plot is so important in Romantic literature. So she's reconceptualizing and that's why she called it what is Romanticism, because it needed to be identified, and it's brilliant because she doesn't, she goes into a field, and even if you ask kind of experts in Romantic literature who are the major, they'll mention 5 people and not mention Hugo. And so with her, Hugo is tops, and Dostoevsky, and they're very different from Tolstoy. And so she did some really heavy lifting intellectually, to say the least, to do that. And what she said in this one little Q&A is, you have to do that. Someone has to do that in the field of the visual arts, for example. And I imagine, I mean, there's been some work that's been done, and that, and not just by objectivists, but I know Toro Buckman was starting to do some in painting. He has a really excellent essay on Caspar David Friedrich, who regarded himself as a romantic and saw himself as a romantic painter. But what it would mean, what were the painters who were calling themselves romantic? What were they doing that was different from other schools? And what were their motivations? And did it have anything to do with the philosophers who were calling themselves romantic, who seem, Schopenhauer seems very different from Hugo. I mean, Ayn Rand had to do that work, and you have to do that work in all the visual fields. What you can't do is, or I shouldn't say can't, because people do. What you shouldn't do is claim that Romanticism is anything that I like, anything that, especially that it glorifies human beings or something like that. And you can make there could be an aesthetic statue of a human being, and well, what would make it romantic? Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's something different. Someone has to identify what exactly Romanticism is and apply it, because literature, it's a conceptual, it deals with concepts. And so, that's something very different. And so if Ayn Rand identifies that what's central to it is not only the artist's own value judgments and values generally, but also that the characters in the fiction have free will, and they're acting according to it, and it's all integrated by plot. What would that mean for a painting?
Mm-hmm.
It's really it's quite difficult. I mean, to sort that out. So I tend not to use the term. And if you're talking about, I mean, there are some painters and there are historians who speak of a period that is, Romanticism in the visual arts, and certainly Romanticism in music. And I mean, at a gut level, Rachmaninoff seems different to me than Bach, but how I would identify that, yeah, that's not my area at all.
Yep.
But yeah, so I would not put Yaron in his place. I would
Not this time anyway. Thank you. Sorry, Andrew. Next time. All right. So the analytic synthetic dichotomy is going to try one more time. He says, follow up. Being, which is sen, is what comes before existence. Sendes. For Plato, for instance, being would be the forms. For Aristotle, it's nature.
I don't think anything comes before existence, and I don't know that we would have a basis for conversation about this, because existence exists. It's the very first thing. And even being, Ayn Rand quotes Aristotle, metaphysics deals with being qua being. That's just another way of talking about existence as such, as she puts it. So those are synonyms in a way. Now, maybe if I gave it some thought, which I haven't done, I would think that there's, existence emphasizes something different from.
He says not existence existence. Existence.
Okay, I don't think I have anything to say about this.
Yep.
Existence. Yeah, I mean, the Platonists talk about, something that's even beyond existence, but that, well, non-existence. Yeah, I don't.
Yep.
Yeah, I would have to read something in more detail than this. So,
Yep.
I apologize if we're not connecting.
All right. I think that's it.
Okay.
We've run out of questions. We've gone 2 hours. That's great.
Yeah, I was worried that you'll be hearing crickets after 45 minutes with an
No,
ancient
no, we've
philosophy
got,
guy. So
yeah, there's people are interested. People are interested.
yeah, I've enjoyed it. Well, we can do it again sometime if there's
Absolutely. This was fun.
yeah,
Absolutely. We should do it again and
yeah,
dig deeper into some of these issues. Thanks, Robert.
yeah.
Have a good night.
My pleasure. You too. Bye.
Bye.